Once upon a time, there was a child who had a fairy godmother. For the child's 10th birthday, the godmother gifted the child with a small magic ball. Out of the ball, there extended a short golden thread, exiting its hole at the speed of life. The godmother said, "Be very careful with this ball. If you are in need at any time, you can gently pull the thread and time will move forward." One afternoon at school, the child is bored and unhappy in math class and takes out the magic ball and very, very gently pulls the thread just a bit. Instantly, the child is on the school bus on the way home from school at the end of the day. Feeling excited at how well this worked, the child decides to be done with school and pulls the thread just a bit more. And suddenly it's summertime and school is over for the year. This is really great, the child thinks, and begins to wonder what life will be like when school is completely over and real adult life has begun. The child pulls the thread a little bit harder, and whoosh, the child is grown up, married, with children, and a good career. As the child settles a little uncomfortably into this new life, the child failed to see that the once lustrous golden thread has begun to lose its luster. First, it turns silver, but then each time the thread was pulled, and it must be admitted, the child pulled it every time there was conflict or discomfort or hard times, the thread turned dull and gray. In the span of one afternoon, the child became an old person, having wished their life away in fear and impatience. The child sought the help of the fairy godmother, who sadly said that the thread only went one way. The child, now nearing the end of life, regrets the choices that were made and longs to relive every skipped over moment, the joyous and the painful, the fun and the boredom, the love and the conflict. But it was too late. Let us be together in a time of prayer and meditation, and yes, lament for the past year. We begin with the words of Psalm 13, which has been attributed to King David as translated by the scholar Stephen Mitchell. How long will this pain go on, Lord? This grief I can hardly bear. How long will anxiety grip me and agony wring my mind? Light up my eyes with your presence. Let me feel your love in my bones. Keep me from losing myself in ignorance and despair. Teach me to be patient, Lord. Teach me to be endlessly patient. Let me trust that your love enfolds me when my heart feels desolate and dry. I will sing to the Lord at all times, even from the depths of pain. Lord, who can be trusted with power? Who may act in your place? Those with a passion for justice, who speak the truth from their hearts, who have let go of selfish interests and grown beyond their own lives, who see the wretched as their family and the poor as their flesh and blood. They alone are impartial and worthy of the people's trust. Their compassion lights up the whole world, and their kindness endures forever. With King David, we raise our voices in complaint and lament. It has been a long pandemic year, and while we think we can begin to see the end, we're not through it yet. It has been difficult, painful, frightening, alienating. We have lost people we love to death. Others among us have had their health permanently damaged by long-term COVID effects. Many of us have lost income during this time, jobs curtailed, jobs canceled. Many businesses have closed, some perhaps permanently. Some of us don't know what our jobs will be when this is all over. Many others of us have worked dangerous frontline jobs as healthcare workers or in work considered essential, such as grocery clerks, meat processors, garbage workers, truck drivers. Many of us have lost or damaged relationships during this pandemic. Many of us have suffered isolation and alienation, unable to gather with people we care for. Like King David, our hearts cry out to God, nature, the universe, whatever, whoever's in charge, in lamentation and complaint. Why is this happening to us? When will it be over? When will things be normal? What can we rely on? The first three questions have no real answers, but the last question can be answered with assurance. We can rely on each other. We can rely on our faith community. We can rely on the links we maintain with those we love and who love us. We can rely on the beauty and power of nature and our place in it. There is strength, there is power, there is sustenance and nurture. It has been a hard year, a painful year, and yet I would not wish it away or have skipped over it. There have been moments of joy and elation and even levity. Who knew there were so many cat videos? Our hearts have swelled with empathy for others. We have received the gift of care from others. It has been quite a year. Let us be together in a time of remembrance, in silent lament and prayer and meditation, gathering strength from whatever gives us strength to face what we have to face. And was sitting in the 15 minutes waiting period. He took out his cello and again just played for those around him. The video is making its rounds on the internet, if you'd care to see it. What we just saw was the video he did at the beginning of the pandemic. Our reading this morning is called 1 Year On, and it's by Mitchell Bernard. A year ago this week, the World Health Organization formally designated coronavirus a global pandemic, sounding the alarm for the modern plague that has since killed more than 2.6 million people worldwide and upended lives and livelihoods everywhere. In this country, close to 530,000 people have died from the virus, one every minute on average for the past year. That's more than we lost in World War II and subsequent wars in Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan combined. Some 22 million people lost their jobs, and half of them cannot find work. Millions more have seen their income slashed, and some 11 million households have fallen far enough behind in rent or mortgage payments that they're at risk of losing their homes. The virus has been devastating for every community. 1 in every 3 Americans has lost someone close to them. But the pandemic and its effects have disproportionately been harder on low-income communities, Black people, Indigenous people, and other people of color, highlighting yet again the injustice and inequity fostered by generations of systemic racism. The rates of new infections and deaths has begun to fall. More than 60 million of us have received a vaccine. President Biden's $1.9 trillion emergency relief package will help the people who need help the most and will help keep cash-strapped states and cities from having to shut down essential services. We're far from being out of the woods, but luckily the administration is acting on the lessons that we've learned at immeasurable cost and setting the table for long-term recovery and needed change. That is our charge for the future as we work together to defeat the pandemic, get our people back to work, dismantle racist structures, and confront the rising costs and mounting dangers of the climate crisis. If there's one thing this year has taught us, it's that these are not separate crises. They are interwoven. They intersect around our lives, and that's how we need to address them. As the coronavirus began to spread like a global wildfire, no country on earth was better prepared than the United States to prevent or respond to the worst public health crisis in a century. And yet, with 4% of the world's population, we've suffered 20% of the world's coronavirus deaths, an indelible indictment of failed leadership during the initial 10 months of the pandemic. And in this same year, the brutal killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and others drove millions of Black Lives Matter supporters into the streets. Meanwhile, record-breaking storms and hurricanes ravaged the Gulf Coast. Sudden derechos spread across drought-devastated farms and ranches, and wildfires burned enough land in the West to cover the state of New Jersey. As with coronavirus, these and other impacts of climate change inflict disproportionate hazard and harm on low-income communities, Black people, Indigenous people, and other people of color. And so protests merged with the pandemic, economic turmoil, and widening climate crisis to underscore the racial injustice and inequity that's been baked into our nation from its birth. Systemic racism means that after both contracting the virus and dying from it at higher rates, people of color are now having a harder time getting vaccinated. Economic racism leaves Black people more likely to work in jobs that expose them to the virus in the first place. and more than twice as likely as white people to be at risk of eviction or foreclosure. Environmental racism means they're also disproportionately exposed to air pollution and respiratory conditions that can compromise the body's ability to fight off the coronavirus. And institutional racism means they're less likely to have access to quality health care and related services. A generation of children have spent the past year in a largely futile effort to keep up from home. Students of color and those from low-income communities where internet service and related resources are limited are rapidly losing further ground to those who entered the pandemic with a substantial leg up. The pandemic has also spread a dangerous strain of xenophobia. With encouragement from the former president, it has triggered a frightening and inexcusable rise in abuse and physical assaults against Asian people in the United States and internationally. It didn't have to be this bad, but here we are. President Biden's $1.9 trillion package is a beginning, but it is only a beginning. We need longer-term investments to help us build back by making our people more prosperous, our communities more resilient, our economy more sustainable, and our society more equitable. And the goal to get our country to 100% clean energy by 2035 is doable if we clean up cars and power plants, if we reduce the pollution that is driving the climate crisis and making people sick. We can build the infrastructure we need so that every person in this country has safe, clean drinking water, including people in Flint, Michigan, and Jackson, Mississippi. And we need to conserve 30% of our lands and federal ocean waters by 2030 in order to address the collapse of species and strengthen the ability of wetlands, forests, and croplands to naturally absorb carbon and lock it away in healthy soils. Poets and astronomers still struggle to take the measure of a year. 525,600 minutes, the late composer Jonathan Larson affirmed, in daylight, in sunsets, in cups of coffee. This past year has been different from most, reminding us just how precious each moment is and exacting a toll beyond measure. We honor that loss and hallow the memory of those we grieve by learning the lessons of the pandemic, resolving to do better in every crisis we face, and taking care of those who need help the most. That's how we rise from the ashes of the pandemic better than before. Lay the foundations for the strong, durable, and broad-based recovery that we need, and promote a more just and equitable society. So ends our reading. Jessica has put in the chat information about how you can send your financial support to our home church, and you can do it really easily through PayPal, or you can do it the old-fashioned way from the before times, using a check that can be mailed to Miss Joy Cranford. So did you have special music just for offering, Jessica, or am I just reminding people to look in the chat?
I think that was just, I looped that in with Yo-Yo Ma, so.
Okay, So I'm just verbally reminding you of what you already know, which basically is the job of a minister. I remember hearing a little bit on the news about some kind of new virus. I think I heard about it on the radio as I was driving to a parade. But it was carnival time in New Orleans, and there were parades to go to and parties. My sister and her husband rented a hotel room on St. Charles Avenue, and we gathered there to watch parades with them on the Saturday before Mardi Gras. Mardi Gras passed as usual in joy and celebration. And then Eric came home from the outdoor cafe where his band played on March the 14th and said the cafe was closed until further notice. And then the mayor of New Orleans canceled St. Patrick's Day and closed the city. I have to say, I have to confess, the first months of the pandemic quarantine period were almost okay. Eric and I had some money saved and a full pantry. Our freezer was full. We had not spent every single day together all day since our honeymoon. So there were aspects of it we actually enjoyed. Eric played music. I baked bread. I made cakes from scratch. I made my own pizzas. I looked up fancy foreign recipes and served them up for the two of us, and we watched a ton of movies. I could sew whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted. It seemed almost fun at first. And then for us, as with so many other people, days began to run into each other. We lost track of time. We would wake up and say, what day is it? And then the next morning, we would do it all over again. We would be talking to each other and completely lose our train of thought. What was I just saying? Became a common expression in our house. I couldn't finish any project I started unless it had a hard deadline, like a sermon or like a dress I was making for someone that they needed for this date. Eric had trouble with his daily trumpet practice. Neuroscience teaches us that parts of our brains were smoothing out. Each time one of us had to go outside to pick up prescriptions for a doctor appointment, to get groceries, we were afraid. We used masks and goggles and rubber gloves. Every package of any size was carefully sprayed down with rubbing alcohol on the front porch to disinfect them, just in case. The worry and the fear were almost overwhelming. And then we got used to it. There was a kind of comfort in recalling the lessons of the 1918 flu pandemic, where people were urged or ordered to stay home and wear masks outside, which some resisted then as now. There were parallels, but there were important differences. In 1918, there was the physical world, and that was it. There was no virtual world. There was no internet. There weren't even telephones in every single household yet. People quarantined in 1918 were well and truly isolated, completely unable to see loved ones outside of their own households, unable to conduct almost any kind of work. We also, in 1918, did not have 21st century science to study the flu virus and to combat it with a widely available vaccine 10 months in. So all of that would have been much worse. But in terms of emotional and psychological effects, it was very similar. We were caught in an inescapable ocean of feelings: fear, anxiety, grief, frustration, and even rage. We should have been the country best prepared and most able to effectively cope with COVID, and yet we were not. Part of our negative feelings about the pandemic was the deadening realization that it didn't have to be this way. We learned to our horror that bad politics could overrule good science. And so the pandemic wore on week after week, month after month. We entered into what some experts have called the fog of forgetting. We forgot what our old routines were like. We forgot familiar things and faces and voices. Our brains put away old habits into long-term memory storage and normalized things like hand sanitizers, wearing masks, and social distancing. I know I can't be the only one who looks at old photos and movies of the before time and thinks to myself, man, those people are way too close together. And now that we're just starting to see what might be the end of a long tunnel, we're afraid that we've been doing this for so long, we might have forgotten how to be normal. Many of us began to work and see family and friends and even go to church using Zoom, which turns out to be both a blessing and a curse. Zoom fatigue, it turns out, is a real thing. Now, Becky is a newcomer, but the rest of us have been doing this for the whole year. Using Zoom several times a week does things to our minds. First, there's the excessive close-up eye contact. It's not normal. We're not used to it. It is psychologically intense. It's draining. Second, there's constantly seeing your own self on screen, which is like living your life constantly in front of a mirror. It's emotionally tiring. And for most of us, it awakens our inner critic. Why does my hair look like that? Is that really how my voice sounds? I look awful. Third, going to Zoom meetings and Zoom family gatherings and Zoom worship reduces our physical mobility. We're trapped in front of our screen so that others can see us while they're trapped in front of their screen. Please, while we're still going through this, take care of yourself. If you need to, reduce your screen size. If possible, reduce your screen time. And if it helps, hide your self view when you're on Zoom. Go to an audio only mode if you have to, and take a break, walk around periodically. Unlike at real in-person church, you do not have to stay seated the whole time in the same place during the whole service. Stand up and down, walk around. It is not wrong to do that. Our brains, our human brains, have evolved over millennia to need certain things for healthy functioning. We crave physical activity and novelty. new things happening, new things to learn and do. Being stuck in one place with the same dang thing happening over and over and over again, our own kind of personal Groundhog Day with the stress of an ongoing worldwide trauma happening. It's like everyone is walking around with mild cognitive impairment, says neuroscientist Mike Yassa. In the beginning, religious congregations had to make some hard decisions, and some made the wrong ones. Too many congregations made it a point of pride to keep meeting in person without masks, and some duly became super spreader events, causing illness and even deaths. Other congregations, like ours, realized the people were the religious institution, not the building, and moved to Zoom or YouTube services. By doing that, we gained several advantages. Nobody had to drive to get to worship. So people who disliked the drive, whether it was 5 minutes or 90 minutes, could attend any Sunday they wanted to. And with recorded services, it didn't even have to be Sunday. Folks could attend services far away using the internet and enjoy preachers in New York and California and anywhere in between. Excuse me. We learned we could enrich our services with resources from the internet. Beautiful pictures and videos, funny and heartwarming stories, and wonderful, wonderful music of all kinds. All of which means that we, along with so many other religious congregations, have probably entered into a post-place church, something that we should remember and strengthen when we are able to resume in-person services. Maybe there are religious buildings that could have other uses than just worship and religious education. Maybe community groups that are not locally popular could meet in religious buildings that aren't being used. There's so much to think about in the new world ahead. In our church, we learned we could stay in touch, we could care for each other, we could make sure folks had what they needed despite the pandemic. We even learned that some in our congregation would find it enjoyable and inspirational to attend more than one service on a single Sunday. So we learned or relearned that we are not alone, but interconnected. The social justice issues intertwined with the environmental issues, braided with the pandemic, also taught us that. We are interconnected. As the children's story had it, and I've told that story to y'all before, it's been a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad year. And yet, it's also been a joyful, loving, funny, very good year. You know what? I wouldn't have skipped it even if I could have. In the Atlantic magazine this month, writer Ellen Cushing concluded her article on the year of the pandemic like this. Some Saturday, not too long from now, I will go to a party or a wedding or even a bar. Maybe I'll hold a baby, and maybe it will be heavy. Inevitably, I will kick my shoes off at some point because I'll be wearing shoes. I won't have to wonder about what I do on weekends because I'll be out doing it. I'll kiss my friends and try their drinks and marvel at how everyone is still the same, but a little different after the year we all had. My brain won't be smoothed out anymore, but for once being wrinkly won't feel so bad. My synapses will be made plastic by the complicated, strange, utterly novel experience of being alive again, human again, connected again. I can't wait. There will be better days. So might this be for all of us. Amen, Ashe, Shalom, Salam, Namaste, blessed be.